Hi, I'm Jeff from New York. Please like and subscribe.
Young Billionaire, Season 2, Episode 35. Kyle couldn't help.
What are you doing?
Damn it! Who dares interrupt a meeting of the Shadow Reapers?
As all the members of the group stood up, they started to shout. Alvin and a few of the leaders walked toward the door. They were shocked and angry, wanting to see what kind of person was brave enough to come in and cause trouble in their territory. Ariel pulled Haley and followed behind them. The members of the Shadow Reapers stood aside and made a path for Alvin and the leaders, while the rest surrounded them or stood behind them. At the door, 4 or 5 gangsters were rolling around on the ground in pain, surrounded by a layer of gray fog. At the entrance, stood 4 tall strong young men, 2 on each side of the door. They were probably the bodyguards of the intruders, and the real big shots had not arrived yet. Alvin let out a heavy sigh, looking at the night sky outside of the door. He wanted to see who it was that dared to come and mess with him in his territory. Very soon, a group of people walked in. Alvin's eyes narrowed slightly. The one who was leading the group was the manager of New York's Berkeley Hotel, Kyle Sanchez. Behind Kyle was a young man who looked like a student who was surrounded by a dozen burly young men. When Alvin saw the young man, a hint of doubt flashed through his mind.
Who is this young man?
He thought. Kyle had an extremely high position in New York. How could a young man have more position than him? Alvin's gaze was fixed on Kyle's face. When Ariel saw the young man, her heart softened and she almost cried. He had come to save her. The man who looked like a student was Jeff.
It's him. Dad, it's the guy who beat me up.
Dave could not help but exclaim as he pointed at Jeff. When he noticed Alvin's gaze, Dave timidly shut his mouth.
Jeff!
Haley cried out, and Ariel covered her mouth. Seeing that Ariel and her daughter were all right, Jeff heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that some of Haley's clothing had been torn. His heart ached again.
I see. It's Kyle Sanchez. Could you explain to me what's going on? Why have you offended our Shadow Reapers?
Alvin pointed to the messy floor. Why do I need to explain? You're just a tiny branch of the Shadow Reapers. What are you being so cocky about? Hurry up and let Miss Ariel go. Kyle said, feeling embarrassed and angry. He had been working in New York for many years on both sides of the law. Even the leader of the Dragon Gang Society, Nathan Anderson, had to be polite to him when he saw him. Hearing Kyle's words, Alvin naturally felt uncomfortable. He knew Kyle had some influence in New York, and perhaps he really should listen to what he was saying. But the Shadow Reapers was now New York's biggest gang, so why should he show him any respect? Alvin thought that this might be the day that would put him on equal footing with Sam, or perhaps he could beat him that day.
So Mr. Sanchez is here to ask me for a person, huh?
Alvin smiled lightly and with a trace of an intimidating aura. He said,
An important person should have the attitude of an important person. Today, Mr. Sanchez damaged my restaurant and even injured my people.
You. Kyle was filled with anger. In all these years, there had never been anyone in New York who dared to speak to him in such a manner.
You what? You'd better pay for all the damage here. Otherwise, don't blame me if something happens to your Berkeley hotel.
Alvin said fiercely and then shouted.
Dave, come here.
Yes.
Dave walked to Alvin's side. His father also followed and stood beside his son. Alvin looked at Jeff, who's standing behind Kyle, and said with a sinister smile,
Since he's bullying my Shadow Reapers, and I think you don't want him to live anymore. You two, father and son, go over there and give him a good beating. I suppose you think so too, Kyle.
Alvin looked at Kyle provocatively and ordered again.
What are you waiting for? Go.
Alvin was determined to show off his power to Kyle. Alvin, don't you dare. Kyle roared in anger. He didn't expect that, with his status, he would not be able to shake Alvin.
Brat, so you're Kyle's man. No wonder you're so cocky. You beat me up like this, so I'm going to get you.
Dave said with his sinister smile, looking at Jeff.
So it was you who hit my son, damn you. I'm going to give you a beating.
Dave's father said angrily. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing his thick arms. Protect him. Kyle roared. A dozen men instantly surrounded Jeff.
Son on Shadow Reaper's territory. They won't dare make a move. Today your father will show you how mighty he is.
All the people in the room were looking at them now. As a leader, he definitely could not allow the prestige of his Shadow Reapers to be undermined.
Let's get this guy. Let the other gangs in New York see what we can do. No one will dare to cause trouble here in the future.
Dave's courage increased as he stood firm in the gang's territory. With that, father and son raised their fists and rushed in front of Kyle and his men with a roar. "Protect him!" Kyle shouted angrily. A dozen men surrounding Jeff instantly surrounded the father and son. When they stepped aside, the pair had been beaten and had fallen to the floor. Looking at them lying on the ground like dead dogs, Alvin's eyes twitched as if he was about to spew out the fire.
Alvin, get them!
Shouted one.
How dare they behave so badly in our territory?
Shouted another.
Sir, please give us the order.
Shouted yet another member. Alvin slowly raised his hand and signaled for the members to stop shouting. He had his plans.
Kyle, I'll give you one last chance. Take your man and get the hell out of here. I'll be kind and let you go.
Alvin said as he gritted his teeth. Bullshit. Do you think you're qualified to let me go? I think you've lived in New York for 2 years and forgotten your place. This time Kyle felt it was not his lucky day. He could ignore his reputation and back down, but that would mean losing face for Jeff and the Florento family. He blamed himself, but he was also extremely angry. I also brought you a big gift this time, Kyle said as he took out a blue plastic box. The box shattered on the ground, and a round thing rolled out. The Shadow Reapers members were all shocked. Many women screamed.
Ah!
It was a head. It was none other than the head of the missing Victor Doom. Originally, Kyle had been brought there to intimidate Alvin, but he had never had the chance to throw the box out. Now he was flustered and exasperated, so he had thrown it at them.
This is bad.
Jeff thought.
Kyle is acting too fast. This is going to make Alvin angry.
You ass?
Alvin felt a ball of fire rush to his head. He was being bullied. He shouted.
Let's get them.
The members of the gang all shouted and rushed towards Kyle and his group. Some of them had blades in their hands, while some even picked up chairs and threw them toward Jeff and Kyle's men. There were more than 150 people at the meeting that day, and Jeff's group had only less than 20 people. Protect Jeff, Kyle shouted. Things quickly evolved beyond his expectations, and Kyle's immediate priority was to not let Jeff get hurt or he would be guilty of negligence. A dozen men stood in front of Jeff like a barrier. Even though Kyle had brought the strongest men under his command, no matter how powerful they were, it was still impossible for them to deal with so many enemies at once. Facing this tide of attacks, these dozen men only managed to block the crowd for 5 minutes before they gradually fell to the ground. They were surrounded and beaten by the Shadow Reapers members. There were only 4 or 5 men left who formed a circle to surround and protect Jeff and Kyle. They used their bodies as shields to prevent the 2 men from getting hurt. A gap opened up in the circle, and one of the Shadow Reapers members threw a chair toward Jeff. In that moment of life or death, Kyle shielded Jeff. As the chair broke on Kyle's body, he fell limply to the ground.
Stop!
Alvin shouted. The gang members stopped. After witnessing Kyle shield Jeff, he became very curious.
What kind of clout did this young man have? With Kyle's honorable status, he still appeared to want to protect this youth.
Mr. Sanchez, are you hurt?
Jeff helped Kyle up, feeling very guilty. It's all right. It's good that you're fine, sir. Blood trickled down the corner of his mouth. He only knew that his duty was to protect Jeff. Jeff was moved by Kyle's loyalty.
Sir,
thought Alvin. Now that Kyle was weakened, he no longer had anything to fear. Instead, he became interested in Jeff.
Who is this young man that Sam appears to answer?
Alvin wondered.
May I ask which family you're from? Tell me.
Alvin asked him. Jeff helped Kyle up onto a chair.
You injured Mr. Sanchez and so many of his men. Your Shadow Reapers is already destined to disappear. Release Ariel and her daughter if you want me to spare your life.
Jeff said coldly to Alvin. He had the temperament of a man from a very wealthy family. No matter how we looked at him, this young man was a complex character. It was clear that Jeff, Kyle, and their men were all defeated and that he couldn't challenge him anymore.
So, why was he so calm and arrogant?
Alvin couldn't figure it out, so he stopped thinking about it. The young man might well be from some wealthy family in New York, but once the news that he had defeated Kyle got out, it would establish his position as a ruler of New York. So what if this was the son of a wealthy family? Why would he still need to be afraid of him? The Shadow Reapers members began to ridicule Jeff.
Aren't you a useless young man? I'll give you respect. If you crawl around on the ground and bark like a dog, then I'll think of letting you go.
Alvin said viciously.
Let's treat this guy like a dog.
Shouted one member.
Kyle is now a servant to the dog.
Shouted another. The members of the Shadow Reapers were all waiting for a good show.